The wind howled through the blackwood forest like a living thing, hungry and merciless, tearing at Freya's thin cloak with fingers of ice. Snow drove sideways into her face, blinding her, each flake a tiny blade against her chapped skin. She stumbled over a root hidden beneath the white blanket, catching herself against a tree trunk with hands so numb she could barely feel the rough bark beneath her palms. 7 months, 7 months of carrying this child, of feeling it grow and kick and turn beneath her heart, and now she would die in this storm with her baby still inside her. The thought sent a sob tearing from her throat, but the wind stole the sound before it could reach her own ears. "Keep moving, you have to keep moving." But her legs wouldn't obey. Her body had given everything it had, and now it demanded payment. Freya sagged against the tree, pressing her forehead to the frozen bark, and let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. What her own blood had done to her. The great hall of Blood Moon Manor had been packed with witnesses. Every noble family, every council member, every wolf of standing had gathered for what Hadrian called an emergency tribunal. Freya had walked in confused, still in her mourning dress, her hand resting protectively over the swell of her belly. She'd thought perhaps there was news of the border disputes, or maybe Freya Bloodmoon. Her brother's voice had rung out cold and formal, and something in his tone made her wolf whimper and press against her ribs. "You stand accused of betraying your noble bloodline by laying with a rogue and conceiving a bastard child." The hall had erupted. Gasps, whispers, the scrape of chairs as people leaned forward to stare at her with hungry, scandalized eyes. Freya's hand had flown to her throat, her mouth opening and closing without sound. That's not true." The words came out thin, reedy, wrong. She'd sounded guilty even to her own ears, and she'd watched her brother's lips curl with satisfaction. "Hadrian, you know that's not true. The father is unknown." Hadrian cut in smoothly. "Because you refuse to name him. What honorable male would refuse to claim his child? Unless, of course, he was a rogue. A wolf without pack, without standing, without right to touch a daughter of the Blood Moon line." "I don't know who the father is." The admission tore from her, shameful and desperate. She'd woken one morning 4 months ago with no memory of the night before, and a strange warmth in her belly. The healers had confirmed her pregnancy a week later. She'd told no one except her mother, sworn to secrecy, begging for help understanding what had happened to her. "Mother, tell them I came to you." But her mother wouldn't meet her eyes. Helena Bloodmoon sat rigid in her seat beside their father, her face carved from stone, and she said nothing. Nothing at all. "Your own mother's silence condemns you." Hadrian descended from the raised platform, each step measured and theatrical. He'd always loved an audience. "You expect us to believe you were, what? Magically impregnated? Touched by the gods themselves?" He laughed, and the sound was poison. "Perhaps the old tales are true and the divine still walk among us, choosing noble daughters for their pleasure." Laughter rippled through the hall. Cruel, cutting laughter that sliced at Freya's dignity until she felt stripped bare before them all. "The child's eyes," she whispered, clinging to the one thing the healers had told her. The one strange truth she didn't understand. They said the child's eyes glow gold in the womb scryings. Like grandmother Ilara's, the healers recognized the bloodline. Like the old gods? Hadrian's voice dripped with mock wonder. "How convenient. A bastard with divine eyes. Surely that excuses the shame you've brought upon our house." "Brother." Freya reached for him, forgetting for a moment the gulf that had grown between them these past years, forgetting everything except the boy who had once held her hand during thunderstorms. "Please. I don't understand what's happening to me. I need help, not—" His hand cracked across her face. The sound echoed through the silent hall. Freya staggered, her palm flying to her burning cheek, and when she looked up at her brother, she saw nothing of the boy she remembered. Only cold, calculated hatred. You are no sister of mine." He said it quietly, just for her, and the words were worse than the blow. "You are a whore who spread her legs for a rogue, and your bastard will not inherit 1 copper of blood moon wealth or 1 acre of blood moon land. I'll make certain of it. I'll make certain of it." Now, freezing to death in the Blackwood, Freya finally understood what those words had meant. Not just exile, not just disgrace. Hadrian wanted her dead, wanted her child dead. And he'd engineered everything. The public accusation, the theatrical trial, the calculated humiliation, to ensure that when she disappeared into the winter wild, no one would question it. No one would mourn. The disgraced daughter of House Bloodmoon fled into the storm rather than face her shame. A convenient ending to an inconvenient problem. But why? The question had tormented her for days as she'd traveled, moving on instinct through territories she barely knew, driven by the desperate need to put distance between herself and the pack that had abandoned her. Why does he hate me so much? Why would he destroy his own sister over? The answer came to her now, clear and terrible in the crystalline cold, the golden eyes. Grandmother Alara had carried the same gift. Their mother had whispered stories about it when they were young, always with a note of awe and fear. The divine flame, she'd called it. A blessing that skipped generations. Hadrian was their father's heir. He would lead the Blood Moon Pack when their father passed, would control its wealth and alliances and power. But if Freya's child truly bore the mark of the old gods, if the golden eyes were real and not just a healer's fancy, then everything changed. A divine touch child would outrank any mortal heir. The old laws were clear on that. Hadrian wasn't protecting the family honor. He was protecting his inheritance. Her brother had tried to murder her for politics. A laugh bubbled up from Freya's chest, hysterical and broken, and she let herself slide down the tree trunk until she sat in the snow. The cold seeped through her thin dress immediately, but she couldn't bring herself to stand again. What was the point? The storm showed no signs of stopping. She'd been walking for 3 days with almost no food, no shelter, no wolf to warm her from the inside. Her own beast had gone silent and still the moment the pack bond severed, retreating to some deep place inside her where Freya couldn't reach. She was alone. Truly, completely alone. Not alone. Her hand found her belly, and beneath her frozen fingers she felt a kick. Strong. Insistent. Alive. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the child she would never meet. "I'm so sorry. I tried. I tried to save us both, but I'm not strong enough. I'm not—" Another kick, harder this time, almost angry. "Get up." The voice came from somewhere deep inside her, somewhere she'd thought had gone dark and quiet forever. It wasn't her wolf. She knew the feel of her beast, and this was different. Older. Stranger. Shot through with gold. "Get up. Walk. You're close now." Close to what? Freya's teeth chattered so violently she could barely form words. "There's nothing out here but trees and snow and—" Ravencrest. The name hit her like a physical blow. Ravencrest territory, of course. She'd been walking northeast without consciously choosing a direction, following some instinct she didn't understand, and she'd wandered straight toward the most dangerous territory in the northern reaches. Everyone knew the stories. 3 years ago, the Ravencrest pack had been one of the largest in the realm. Its alpha a powerful male with 4 strong sons, and an army that made even the king hesitate. Then, the Blood War came. Enemy packs had descended on Ravencrest lands like locusts, and when the fighting finally ended, only ruins remained. The old alpha was dead. 3 of his sons were dead. The pack was decimated, reduced to a handful of survivors clinging to existence in a burned-out territory. And now, a 4th son ruled over the ashes. Cale Ravencrest, they called him, the Ghost Alpha. A male so scarred by war that even his own people feared to meet his eyes. "He's kind." The voice again, that strange golden presence in her mind. He's lonely. He's ours. What does that even mean? But Freya was already moving, hauling herself upright with hands that screamed in protest. The baby kicked again, insistent, and she felt something warm spread through her chest despite the cold. Not heat exactly. More like hope. A tiny, stubborn flame that refused to go out. She walked. The snow continued to fall, the wind continued to howl, and Freya continued to place one foot in front of the other. She fell twice, 3 times, 4. Lost count somewhere around the 5th collapse. Each time, that golden warmth pulsed in her chest, and the baby kicked and she dragged herself upright again. Almost there. Keep going. He's waiting. The trees began to thin. Freya blinked through ice-crusted lashes and saw, impossibly, firelight. A cottage emerged from the storm like a dream, small and sturdy with smoke curling from its chimney. Behind it, she could make out the shapes of other buildings. A village, she realized, or what remained of one. Some structures stood intact while others were clearly still being rebuilt, their frames skeletal against the gray sky. Ravencrest. She'd made it to Ravencrest. Her legs gave out 10 feet from the cottage door. The snow caught her gently, almost kindly, and Freya thought perhaps dying here wouldn't be so bad. At least she'd tried. At least she'd made it this far. Her eyes were closing, the golden warmth in her chest fading to a dim ember, when she heard voices. Someone in the snow. Fetch the Alpha now. Running footsteps. Hands on her arms, her shoulders, turning her over. Freya forced her eyes open one last time and saw faces swimming above her. A woman with gray-streaked hair and worried eyes, a young man with a healer's satchel over his shoulder. She's pregnant, the woman gasped. Gods above, she's about to— Don't move her. I'll get blankets. Someone get the Alpha. Freya wanted to protest. She wasn't about to deliver, not for another 2 months at least. But her voice wouldn't work, and the world was going soft and dark around the edges. And the last thing she heard before unconsciousness claimed her was the crunch of heavy footsteps in the snow. A presence. Warmth. The scent of pine and wood smoke and something else. Something that made the ember in her chest flare bright and hot and hungry. Then nothing. She dreamed of golden eyes watching her from the darkness. When Freya woke, she was warm. That simple fact shocked her so completely that she lay still for several long moments, convinced she must be dead. But no. Death wouldn't feel like this. Rough wool blankets against her skin. The crackle of a fire nearby. The smell of herbs and rendered fat. A healer's cottage smell that brought tears to her eyes because it meant safety. It meant help. It meant she wasn't alone in the storm anymore. She turned her head and found herself in a small, clean room with whitewashed walls and a single window, now dark with night. The fire burned steady in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the ceiling. A chair sat empty beside her bed, its cushion dented as though someone had recently risen from it. The baby. Freya's hands flew to her belly, panic seizing her throat. But there was the familiar swell, and there was the familiar kick, and she sobbed with relief as she felt her child move beneath her palms. You're awake. The voice came from the doorway. Low, rough, scraped raw by smoke or grief or both. Freya's head turned toward the sound, her heart hammering against her ribs, and the world stopped. He was tall. That was her first thought. Nonsensical and numb. He was tall, broad-shouldered, built like a warrior born. His dark hair was cropped close to his skull, and his face was a map of violence. A scar running from his left temple to his jaw, another curling around the corner of his mouth, a third disappearing beneath the collar of his simple shirt. His eyes were the gray of storm clouds, of steel, of winter. And then, those eyes met hers, and everything changed. Heat. It started in her chest and spread outward like molten gold through her veins, like sunlight after a long, dark winter, like coming home to a place she'd never been. Her dormant wolf surged up from the depths where it had hidden, slamming against her ribs, keening with a need Freya didn't understand. Mate, 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 mate. And the baby kicked so hard it stole her breath. Across the room, the scarred stranger had gone rigid. His pupils were blown wide, and as Freya watched, a ring of brilliant amber bled into the gray of his irises. His chest heaved with a sharp inhale, and from his throat came a sound she'd never heard from a male before. A growl so low it seemed to resonate in her very bones, possessive and reverent and raw. "Mate," he breathed, and the word cracked through the air like lightning. "Home," her wolf howled. "Safe. His. Ours." But Freya's mind screamed something different. She'd trusted her family, trusted her pack, trusted the bonds of blood and loyalty that were supposed to protect her. And they'd cast her into a storm to die. She couldn't trust this. She couldn't trust him. She couldn't trust anyone. So why did every cell in her body strain toward him like a flower toward the sun? The scarred alpha took a step forward, stopped. His hands clenched at his sides, trembling visibly, and the amber in his eyes flared brighter as he fought for control. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice rough with the effort of restraint. "I swear it on my blood and my bones. Whatever you're running from, whoever put that fear in your eyes, they will never touch you again. Not here. Not while I breathe." Freya stared at him. This stranger who looked at her like she was precious, like she mattered, like he'd burn the world to keep her safe. Her wolf pressed against her ribs, whimpering, desperate to go to him. Her heart hammered so loud she was certain he could hear it. And her baby, her strange golden-eyed child, kicked once more and was still, as if it too was waiting to see what she would do. "Who are you?" Freya whispered. The scarred alpha's mouth curved in something that might have been a smile, if smiles could be made of broken glass and desperate hope. "Kael Ravencrest," he said. "And you, beautiful stranger, are my mate." Freya's breath caught in her throat, trapped there by the weight of his words. Mate. The word echoed through her mind like a bell struck in an empty cathedral, reverberating through spaces she hadn't known existed within her. Her wolf, silent for so long she'd feared the beast had died along with her pack bond, surged against her ribs with desperate, keening need. His, ours, safe, home. But Freya had learned the hard way what happened when she trusted. When she believed in bonds and blood and the people who were supposed to protect her. She pressed back against the pillows, one hand flying to her belly where her child stirred restlessly, and forced herself to meet those storm-gray eyes now ringed with burning amber. "I don't—" Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard, tasting fear and something else. Something warm and honeyed that terrified her even more than the fear. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not anyone's mate. I need to rest. And then I'll leave. I won't trouble your pack." Kael Ravencrest hadn't moved from his position near the doorway, but somehow the air between them felt charged, electric, as though lightning might strike at any moment. The amber in his eyes flickered, and she watched him struggle visibly for control. His jaw clenching, his scarred hands curling into fists at his sides. "You're not going anywhere." The words came out rough, almost harsh, and Freya flinched. Immediately, his expression shifted. The fierce possessiveness didn't disappear, but something softer crept in around the edges. Concern, perhaps, or the ghost of an apology. "That came out wrong. I meant, you're in no condition to travel. You nearly died in that storm. The healer says you need rest, food, warmth. The baby needs you healthy." The baby. Freya's hand pressed harder against her belly, and as if responding to her touch, the child kicked. Strong. Insistent. Alive. Despite everything. "How do you know about—" She stopped, remembering the voices before she'd lost consciousness. Someone had seen her condition. Of course they had. "The whole village knows." Kale's voice gentled, losing some of its roughness. A pregnant female, alone in a winter storm, wearing the tattered remains of a noble house's dress. Everyone has questions. He paused, and when he spoke again, there was something almost vulnerable beneath the gravel of his tone. I'm not going to ask them. Not until you're ready to answer. The kindness in those words hit her harder than cruelty would have. Freya had braced herself for interrogation, for demands, for the same cold judgment she'd faced in the Blood Moon Great Hall. Instead, this scarred stranger was offering her patience. It's a trick, whispered the part of her that had watched her mother refuse to meet her eyes. It's always a trick. But her wolf disagreed. Her wolf strained toward him with every fiber of its being, and the golden warmth in her chest, that strange presence that had guided her through the storm, pulsed with something that felt dangerously like recognition. The bond, Freya said slowly, forcing herself to address the words he'd spoken. You said I'm your mate. You are. No hesitation, no doubt. The certainty in his voice was absolute. I felt... She stopped, unsure how to describe it, the heat spreading through her veins like liquid sunlight. The way her wolf had awakened after weeks of silence. The pull that even now made her want to reach for him, to close the distance between them, to bury her face against his chest and breathe in that scent of pine and wood smoke and safety. You felt it too. Kale took one careful step closer, then another. He moved like a man approaching a wounded animal, slow and deliberate, giving her every opportunity to retreat. I saw it in your eyes. The moment our gazes met, you felt the bond snap into place. Freya wanted to deny it, wanted to insist that she'd felt nothing, that this was all some misunderstanding, that she was just a pregnant outcast who needed a few days' shelter before continuing her journey to... where? She had nowhere to go. No pack would take her, not with Hadrian's accusations hanging over her head. Not with a bastard child in her belly and no mate to claim them. He's claiming you now, her wolf whispered. He's offering everything we need. Why are you fighting? Because fighting was all she had left, because trust had nearly destroyed her once, and she couldn't survive it happening again. The mate bond is sacred, she said, her voice steadier now. But it's not a guarantee of anything. It's not... She thought of her parents, mated for 30 years, presenting a united front as they watched their daughter be cast into exile. It doesn't mean you won't hurt me. Something flickered across Kale's scarred face. Pain, perhaps, or understanding. He stopped his slow advance, leaving several feet of space between them. No, he agreed quietly. It doesn't. The bond tells us we belong together. It doesn't tell us how to build that belonging. It doesn't force trust where trust hasn't been earned. He held her gaze, and in the amber-gray depths of his eyes, she saw a loneliness that matched her own. I'm not asking you to trust me, Freya. Not yet. I'm asking you to stay long enough to let me prove I'm worthy of that trust. How does he know my name? She hadn't told him. She was certain she hadn't told him. The healer found your house sigil embroidered on your underdress, Kale said, apparently reading the question in her expression. She recognized the Blood Moon crest. And your first name. You said it while you were unconscious. You said a lot of things? Cold fear slithered down Freya's spine. What things? Enough to know that someone hurt you badly. Someone you trusted. His voice hardened, the amber in his eyes flaring brighter. Enough to know that if I ever meet your brother Hadrian, I will tear his throat out with my bare hands. The viciousness of the statement should have frightened her. Instead, Freya felt something crack open in her chest. Some wall she'd built to contain the grief and rage that had threatened to consume her since that terrible day in the Great Hall. You don't even know what he did, she whispered. I know he made you run through a winter storm while 7 months pregnant. Kale's jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping beneath his scarred skin. I know you were half frozen when my people found you. Starving, terrified, alone. I know you flinched when I raised my voice, which means someone taught you to expect violence from those who should protect you. He took a breath, visibly forcing himself to calm. That's enough. That's more than enough. Freya stared at him, this fierce stranger who defended her honor without knowing her story, who looked at her like she was precious rather than shameful, who called her mate with such certainty it made her heart ache. I don't understand you, she said finally. Something that might have been a smile ghosted across Kale's lips, just a slight softening of that harsh mouth, a brief glimpse of the man beneath the scars. You will, he said. I'm not going anywhere. Neither are you. At least, not until you're strong enough to make that choice freely. For now. He stepped back toward the doorway, putting even more distance between them. For now, I'll let you rest. The healer will bring you dinner soon. Is there anything you need? 1,000 things. A family that hadn't betrayed her. A pack that hadn't cast her out. Answers about the father of her child and why she couldn't remember the night of conception. Understanding of the golden warmth in her chest and the golden eyes the healers had seen in her baby's soul. But she couldn't ask for any of those things, so she shook her head. Kale lingered in the doorway a moment longer, his storm-gray eyes drinking in the sight of her like she was water, and he'd been dying of thirst. I'll come back in the morning, he said. Rest well, Freya Bloodmoon. You're safe here. I swear it on my life. Then he was gone, and Freya was alone with the fire's crackle and the baby's kicks, and the maddening, impossible pull of a bond she'd never asked for and couldn't afford to want. Morning came gray and cold, pale winter light filtering through the cottage window to paint silver patterns across Freya's blankets. She'd slept deeper than she had in weeks, perhaps months, and woken to find herself ravenous in a way that felt almost violent. The baby, she thought, pressing her palm to her belly. We both need to eat. As if summoned by the thought, there was a soft knock at the door. Freya tensed, pulling the blankets higher, but the voice that called through was deep and familiar, and sent warmth cascading through her chest despite her best efforts to resist it. It's Kale. I've brought breakfast. May I come in? He's asking permission. The realization hit her with unexpected force. An alpha, the alpha, ruler of this territory, was standing outside a guest room in his own holdings, waiting for approval to enter. Yes, she heard herself say. You can come in. The door swung open, and Kale entered carrying a wooden tray laden with more food than Freya had seen in days. Thick slices of bread, still steaming from the oven, a pot of honey and another of butter, strips of cured meat, a bowl of porridge with cream swirled through it, a cup of something that smelled of herbs and warmth. The healer says you need to rebuild your strength, Kale said, approaching the bed slowly, carefully, the way he'd moved last night, giving her time to object, giving her space to retreat. I thought I'd bring your meals myself. It's no trouble. An alpha bringing meals like a servant, Freya thought dazedly. What kind of man does that? He set the tray on a small table near the bed, then pulled the chair from the corner and positioned it at least 6 feet away before settling into it. The deliberate distance wasn't lost on her. You don't have to, she started. I know I don't have to. Kale's voice was steady, calm. I want to. Unless it makes you uncomfortable? Freya considered the question seriously. Did it make her uncomfortable? Having this scarred, powerful male sitting across from her while she ate, watching her with those storm-gray eyes? Her wolf certainly didn't object. Her beast was practically purring at his presence, content and calm in a way she hadn't felt since she couldn't remember when. No, she admitted. It doesn't make me uncomfortable, but it seems beneath your station. A low, rough sound escaped Kale's throat. A laugh, she realized. It transformed his scarred face into something almost handsome, softening the harsh lines, crinkling the corners of his eyes. My station, he repeated. I'm alpha of a pack that barely exists anymore, ruling over ruins and refugees. I don't think bringing breakfast to a pregnant female threatens my dignity." There was self-deprecation in those words, but no bitterness. Just honest acknowledgement of the reality she'd glimpsed on her desperate journey through his lands: burned villages, skeletal buildings, a people struggling to rebuild from devastation. Freya reached for the tray, suddenly self-conscious of how hungry she was. The first bite of bread was so good it brought tears to her eyes, and she had to look away to hide them. "You're crying." Kyle's voice was tight with concern. Is something wrong?" No, I just..." She swiped at her eyes impatiently. "I haven't eaten properly in days. It's very good. That's all." A muscle jumped in Kale's jaw. She saw his hands clench on his knees, then deliberately relax. "Days," he repeated quietly. "You were traveling for days without proper food. It's hard to find food in a winter storm." The words came out sharper than she intended. "And I didn't have time to pack provisions when my own pack threw me out in the middle of the night." Silence followed her admission. Freya focused on eating, unable to meet his eyes, and told herself it didn't matter what he thought of her. He was just a stranger. The mate bond was just biology. She would recover her strength and leave before. "When I was 18, Kale said, his voice low and rough, "an enemy pack attacked during our winter solstice celebration. They came at night, without warning. I watched my older brother die trying to protect our mother. I carried her body out of the burning Great Hall myself." Freya's hands stilled on the tray. She looked up at him, this scarred warrior who had witnessed horrors she could barely imagine. 3 years later, they came back. The Blood War. "You've probably heard stories." His mouth twisted. "Most of them are true. When it was over, I was the only one of my father's sons still breathing, and half our pack was dead. The other half..." He gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the village beyond. "We're rebuilding. Slowly. Some days it feels like we're building on graves." "Why are you telling me this?" Freya whispered. Kale's eyes met hers, and in their gray depths, she saw not the fierce alpha or the possessive mate, but a man who understood loss, who understood betrayal, who understood what it meant to have everything you loved ripped away. "Because I want you to know that I understand," he said simply. "Not the specifics of your pain. Those are yours to share or not share as you choose, but the feeling of it, the grief, the rage, the way it changes you into someone you don't recognize." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "And because I want you to know that I would never, ever do to you what your family did. I would cut off my own hand before I raised it against you or your child. Our child." He'd started to say our child and corrected himself, as though he already thought of the baby as his. The golden warmth in Freya's chest pulsed hard, and she felt her wolf stretch toward him, desperate to close the distance. "You barely know me," she managed. "I know enough." The certainty in his voice was unwavering. "I know you're strong enough to survive everything your pack put you through. I know you're brave enough to walk through a winter storm for the sake of your child. I know you're beautiful in a way that makes it hard to breathe when I look at you." His scarred hands clenched on his knees again. "And I know that the moment our eyes met, something in my chest that's been broken for 3 years started to heal." Freya didn't know what to say. Didn't know what to do with this outpouring of honesty from a man she'd known for less than a day. Her wolf keened at the vulnerability in his words, wanting to comfort him, wanting to be comforted in return. But trust was a door she'd locked and barred and reinforced, and she couldn't open it just because a scarred stranger spoke pretty words. "I need time," she said finally, "to process all of this, the bond and everything." Kale nodded immediately. "You'll have it. As much time as you need. And space. I need space," he agreed. "I'll visit for meals if that's acceptable. So I can see for myself that you're recovering. But I won't push. I won't ask for more than you can give. Her wolf whimpered at the word space, wanting the opposite, wanting closeness and warmth, and the comfort of their mate. But Freya forced herself to nod. That's acceptable. Something like relief flickered across Kale's scarred face. He rose from the chair, moving carefully, maintaining that deliberate distance. Finish eating, he said. The healer will check on you after. She's the closest thing we have to a midwife. She helped deliver most of the pups born here before the war. She knows what she's doing. Thank you. The words felt inadequate for everything he'd offered. Food, shelter, patience, understanding, vulnerability. But Freya didn't have better words right now, so she repeated them. Thank you, Kale. His name on her lips made him freeze mid-step. The amber flared in his eyes again, bright and hungry, and for one heart-stopping moment she thought he might cross the room and take her in his arms. But he didn't. He closed his eyes, breathed deep, and when he opened them again, the amber had receded. You're welcome, Freya, he said. Rest well. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with half-eaten breakfast and a heart that felt like it was cracking open despite her best efforts to keep it closed. 4 days passed. 4 days of Kale bringing meals and sitting at a careful distance while she ate. 4 days of the healer, a kind, no-nonsense female named Elena, checking her vital signs and examining her belly and pronouncing the baby healthy despite everything. 4 days of rest and food and warmth, slowly filling the hollow places in Freya's body and soul. And 4 days of that maddening pull toward a mate she hadn't chosen and couldn't quite trust. On the 5th day, Freya woke to raised voices outside her window. Should be driven out before she brings trouble down on all of us. The speaker was male, his tone aggressive and cutting. Freya's heart stuttered in her chest. She's bearing a bastard, for God's sake. The Blood Moons cast her out for good reason, and now we're supposed to shelter her? Feed her? Risk retaliation from a noble pack for some... Careful. Kyle's voice, quiet and deadly calm. Think very carefully about the next words that come out of your mouth, Garrett. Freya sat up in bed, her hands trembling. They were talking about her. Someone in Kale's pack wanted her gone, and part of her. The part that had watched her own mother refuse to meet her eyes, whispered that she should run. Should leave before she brought more destruction down on people who had shown her kindness. Stay. The golden warmth pulsed in her chest. He's defending you. Listen. She crept to the window, pressing close to the wall so she could hear without being seen. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Garrett's voice was belligerent, but she heard the threat of fear beneath it. She's trouble, Alpha. A disgraced female from a rival pack. Pregnant with gods, know whose pup? My pup. Kale's voice cut through like a blade. My mate's pup, which makes it mine by every law that matters. Unless you're suggesting I abandon my fated match because she comes from inconvenient circumstances. Silence. Freya pressed her hand to her mouth, heart hammering. That's... Garrett sputtered. You can't be serious. She's a blood moon. She is mine. The possessive rumble in Kale's voice made Freya's wolf surge against her ribs, whimpering with desperate wanting. And anyone who speaks ill of her, anyone who questions her honor, her worth, her place in this pack, will answer to me. Personally. More silence. When Garrett spoke again, his voice had lost all its belligerence. I meant no offense, Alpha. Then keep your mouth shut about my mate. A pause, and when Kale spoke again, his voice was terrifyingly soft. This is not a warning, I'll repeat, Garrett. If I hear you've been spreading poison about her, if I hear you've so much as looked at her wrong, I will tear out your tongue and feed it to the crows. Am I understood? Yes, Alpha. Good. Now get out of my sight. Footsteps retreated rapidly. Freya stood frozen at the window, her heart pounding, trying to process what she'd just witnessed. Kale had claimed her, publicly. To his own war captain, she'd gathered from overheard conversations that Garrett held a position of authority in what remained of the Ravencrest hierarchy. He'd called her his mate in front of witnesses, threatened violence against anyone who disrespected her, declared her child his own, and she hadn't even accepted the bond yet. He's different. The realization crept through her like spring sunlight melting winter ice. He's actually different. Hadrian had used pretty words too once, had called her dear sister, and brought her gifts, and seemed to care about her happiness, all while plotting to destroy her the moment she became inconvenient. But Hadrian had never defended her when she wasn't watching, had never risked his own standing to protect her reputation, had never looked at her the way Chaol looked at her, like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. Freya sank back onto the bed, pressing both hands to her face. Her wolf paced restlessly inside her, demanding she go to their mate, demand to know why he'd claim her so fiercely when she'd given him nothing but wariness and distance. Because that's what mates do. Her wolf growled. They protect. They defend. They love. Love is a fairy tale, Freya shot back silently. Love doesn't stop people from betraying you. He won't betray us. The golden warmth pulsed, warm and certain. He can't. The bond won't let him. That wasn't true, and Freya knew it. Mated pairs could still hurt each other, could still lie and scheme and destroy. The bond was just connection, not guarantee. Her own parents had taught her that. But as she sat in the healer's cottage, listening to the distant sounds of the Ravencrest village going about its day, she found herself wondering, for the first time since her exile, what it might feel like to trust again, to let someone in, to stop running. A knock at the door made her jump. She straightened on the bed, wiping her face, trying to compose herself before she called out, "Come in." The door opened. Kyle stood there with a tray of lunch in his hands, and when their eyes met, Freya saw something new in his expression. Concern, yes, that was always there, always, but also uncertainty, vulnerability. He knew she'd heard. "May I?" He nodded toward his usual chair. Freya considered telling him no, considered demanding explanations, or perhaps thanking him, or possibly screaming at him for claiming rights over her that she hadn't granted. Instead, she heard herself say, "Yes, please, stay." The relief that flickered across his scarred face was almost painful to witness. He entered slowly, set down the tray, settled into the chair, maintained that careful distance. But when their eyes met again, something between them had shifted. Freya didn't know if it was trust. Not yet. But it felt like the first crack in a very thick wall. And her wolf, her strange golden child, and that mysterious warmth in her chest all seemed to pulse with quiet, patient hope. The days that followed carried a rhythm Freya hadn't expected to find comforting. Chaol came 3 times daily. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. Always with a tray he'd prepared himself. Always settling into that same chair at a respectful distance. Always watching her with those amber eyes that seemed to see straight through every defense she'd constructed. They talked sometimes. About nothing important at first. The weather turning milder, the progress of the village rebuilding, the herbs Elena was teaching Freya to identify. Safe topics, neutral ground. But slowly, gradually, the conversations deepened. Chaol told her about the war that had devastated Ravencrest, about the alliance of 3 packs who'd attacked without warning, slaughtering his father and most of their warriors in a single blood-soaked night. About how he'd been barely 19, suddenly alpha of a pack reduced to widows, orphans, and the handful of fighters too injured to have died with the rest. His voice remained steady as he spoke, but Freya could see the old pain carved into every line of his face, etched into the scars that crossed his jaw and disappeared beneath his collar. "Why are you telling me this?" she'd asked on the 4th day, genuinely confused. Alphas didn't show weakness. Hadrian had taught her that much, had used vulnerability as a weapon, feigning openness to draw out her secrets before wielding them against her. Kyle had considered the question seriously, the way he seemed to consider everything. "Because you're my mate," he said simply, "and mates shouldn't have secrets between them. Not about the things that matter." "We're not," Freya started, then stopped. They weren't mated. Not officially. She hadn't accepted the bond, hadn't allowed him to mark her, but denying the connection entirely felt like a lie, and she was so tired of lies. "Not yet," Kale agreed, and something in his tone made her breath catch. "But I'm patient, and I want you to know who I am. All of who I am, not just the alpha everyone else sees. If you're going to trust me eventually, you need to understand what you're trusting." It was such a strange approach, so unlike anything she'd experienced before. Hadrian had demanded trust as his due, had taken offense when she questioned his motives, had punished her with cold silences and cutting remarks whenever she failed to meet his expectations. But Kale simply offered himself, laid bare his wounds and his failures and his hopes, then waited to see if she'd do the same. Though he wasn't perfect at it. On the 6th evening, Freya mentioned wanting to walk through the village, just to stretch her legs, to feel something other than cottage walls around her. Kale's response was immediate and absolute. "No, it's not safe. Not until we know Hadrian isn't watching the borders." The flat refusal hit her like cold water. She went still, her hand tightening on the arm of her chair, and said nothing. Kale must have seen her expression change, because he kept talking, faster now, as if volume and logic could undo the damage. "I just mean, the perimeter isn't fully secure and you're still recovering. And the baby? You sound like my brother." The words came out quiet and devastating. Kyle flinched as if she'd struck him, the color drained from his scarred face. "I didn't..." He stopped, closed his eyes. When he opened them, the possessive certainty was gone, replaced by something rawer. The look of a man who'd just heard exactly how wrong he'd gotten it. "You're right. I was making your choices for you. That's not my decision." "No, it isn't." A long silence stretched between them. Kale sat down heavily, dragging a hand over his face. "I'm sorry, Freya, He let out a rough breath. "I've spent 3 years being responsible for everyone's safety. Deciding who goes where, who does what. It's become instinct. But instinct isn't the same as right. And I should have asked what you needed instead of telling you what I'd allow." He met her eyes, and the shame in his was genuine. "Will you forgive me?" "Ask me to walk with you tomorrow," Freya said. "Not tell me. Ask." "Will you walk through the village with me tomorrow?" "Yes." The tension broke. Not entirely. The bruise of the moment would linger for days, a useful reminder that even good men carried patterns they had to unlearn. But Kale didn't retreat behind defensiveness or cold silence the way Hadrian would have. He sat with the discomfort, accepted the correction, and the next morning he was at her door asking, not telling. She didn't. Not yet. The walls around her heart had been built too thick and too high for a few days of kindness to demolish them entirely. But she found herself leaning toward him when he spoke, found her wolf settling into contentment whenever he was near, found the golden warmth in her chest growing stronger with each conversation. Her daughter seemed to respond to his presence too. The pup shifted and settled whenever Kale was in the room, turning toward the sound of his voice the way a plant turns toward light. It should have terrified her, this bond forming without her permission, these ties strengthening beyond her control. Instead, it felt like waking up from a long nightmare to discover the sun still existed. On the 7th day after Freya had overheard Kale defending her to Garrett, a messenger arrived at the village gates. She learned about it from Elena, who'd come to check on her healing shoulder. Nearly mended now, the flesh pink and new where frostbite had threatened to steal it. The healer's weathered face was troubled as she worked, her movements more brisk than usual, and Freya's wolf immediately went alert. "What's wrong?" Elena hesitated. "It's not my place to..." "Please." Freya caught the older woman's wrist, surprising them both. If it concerns me, I need to know. I can't protect myself or my daughter if I'm kept ignorant of threats. The healer studied her for a long moment, then sighed. An ambassador arrived this morning, from the Blood Moon Pack. The world tilted sideways. Freya gripped the edge of the bed, fighting a wave of dizziness that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. Blood Moon. Her pack. Her family. The people who'd cast her out to die in a winter storm, who'd believed Hadrian's lies without question, who'd watched her stumble into the snow with nothing but the clothes on her back and hadn't lifted a single finger to help her. Who? The word came out strangled. Your brother, Hadrian Bloodmoon. Elena's voice was carefully neutral, but her eyes were sharp with concern. He's claiming he's come to bring you home. Says it was all a terrible misunderstanding, that the pack realizes they made a mistake, that your parents are desperate to see you safe. Freya laughed. The sound was ugly, harsh, nothing like humor, more like a wounded animal snarling at the trap that had caught it. A misunderstanding. He stood before the entire pack and called me a whore. Claimed I'd spread my legs for a rogue and brought shame on our bloodline. Our mother wouldn't even look at me when they threw me out. I know, child. Elena's hand covered hers, warm and steady. Kale knows too. He's meeting with your brother now, but he wanted me to prepare you. I need to see him. Freya was already pushing herself off the bed, ignoring the healer's protests. Her wolf was howling inside her skull, a discordant mix of terror and rage that made it hard to think straight. I need to hear what lies Hadrian's spinning now. Freya, you should rest. My brother came to finish what he started. The certainty of it settled into her bones like ice. He didn't travel all this way to apologize. Whatever he's telling Kale, it's a performance. A mask. I know how he operates, Elena. I know how he thinks. The healer looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Freya's expression must have convinced her. She stepped back, allowing Freya to rise, though she hovered close as if expecting her to collapse. Freya's legs felt unsteady beneath her, her heart racing so fast she could feel it in her throat. But she forced herself to move, to walk, to breathe. She'd spent months running from Hadrian's shadow. It was time to face it head-on. The meeting was being held in what had once been the pack hall, a large timber structure at the village's center that bore obvious scars from the war. Half the roof had been replaced with newer wood, the color lighter than the weathered beams surrounding it, and one entire wall showed evidence of fire damage that had been hastily patched. But inside, the space had been cleaned and organized, rough-hewn benches arranged around a central fire pit where Kale sat with several of his advisors. And across from them, looking as polished and pristine as if he'd stepped from their father's grand house rather than traveled for days through wilderness, sat Hadrian. Freya's wolf snarled at the sight of him. He looked exactly as she remembered. Golden hair swept back from a handsome face, pale blue eyes that sparkled with practiced warmth, every gesture and expression calibrated to project concern and sincerity. He was dressed in the formal attire of a Blood Moon ambassador, the crimson sash across his chest marking him as the heir apparent, and when he spoke, his voice carried that same smooth, reasonable tone that had convinced their parents to believe his lies. Simply want to bring my poor sister home, Hadrian was saying as Freya slipped through the door. She's clearly confused, possibly traumatized. The pregnancy has been difficult, I'm told, and in her state she may have misremembered certain events. I remember everything. Every head in the room swung toward her. Freya felt the weight of their stares like physical pressure, felt her legs trembling with the effort of staying upright, felt her daughter press hard against one side of her belly, bracing as if the child could sense the tension flooding through her mother's body. But she kept her chin high, her gaze locked on her brother's face. For just an instant, so brief she might have imagined it, something flickered behind Hadrian's concerned mask. Surprise? Yes, but also calculation. And beneath that, so well hidden that only someone who'd spent 18 years learning to read his moods would catch it. A flash of pure, cold fury. Then the mask slammed back into place, and he was rising from his seat with arms outstretched, the picture of relieved sibling affection. Freya, thank the moon you're alive. We've been so worried. Don't. The single word stopped him mid-step. Freya was distantly aware of Kale moving to stand beside her, his warmth at her shoulder, but she couldn't tear her attention away from the predator wearing her brother's face. Don't pretend you didn't orchestrate my exile. Don't insult my intelligence by acting like you care whether I live or die. Hadrian's expression shifted to wounded bewilderment. Sister, I don't understand. You disappeared in the middle of the night. You had father's guards drag me from my bed. Her voice was rising despite her efforts to control it, months of suppressed rage beginning to crack through the walls she'd built. You stood in front of the entire pack and accused me of fucking rogues. You told our parents I'd brought shame upon the Blood Moon name, that my child was an abomination that should never be allowed to draw breath. Freya, please. Hadrian glanced at Kale and the assembled advisors with an expression of pained embarrassment, the caring brother forced to deal with an irrational sibling in public. You're upset. I understand. The circumstances of your departure were unfortunate. But surely we can discuss this privately. There's nothing private about what you did to me. Freya stepped forward, her wolf lending her strength she hadn't known she possessed. You destroyed my reputation. You poisoned our parents against me. You threw me out in a winter storm to die, Hadrian. 7 months pregnant, and you sent me into the snow without food, without shelter, without a single soul willing to help me. And now you show up here with your concerned brother act, expecting me to… what? Fall into your arms? Thank you for coming to rescue me? The pack voted. The pack believed your lies. Her voice cracked on the last word. She felt Kale's hand brush her lower back, a feather-light touch of support, and something in her chest loosened enough that she could breathe. Why are you really here, brother? What do you want? For a long moment, Hadrian simply stared at her. Then, slowly, his wounded expression melted into something more honest. Not the truth exactly. She doubted he was capable of true honesty anymore, but something closer to it. A thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. A sharpening of his features that revealed the predator lurking beneath the charming mask. I want what's best for our family, he said softly. I want to bring you home, where you belong, where your condition can be properly managed, where your child can be raised among pack, rather than in this collection of ruins and refugees. My child will be raised here. Kale's voice was quiet but utterly implacable. With her mother, her father, her pack. Whatever twisted game you're playing, Blood Moon Heir, it ends now. Hadrian's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. Her father? You've claimed a child that isn't yours? How very generous of you, Alpha Ravencrest. Some might call it foolish. Some might lose their tongues for the insult. The tension in the room ratcheted higher. Freya could feel the Ravencrest wolves shifting, hands moving toward weapons, muscles coiling in preparation for violence. But Hadrian just laughed, a light, easy sound that set her teeth on edge. Peace, peace. I meant no offense. He spread his hands in a gesture of surrender that convinced no one. I can see my sister has found sanctuary here. I'll return to Blood Moon and report that she's alive and well. Our parents will be relieved, I'm sure. He turned to leave, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. His gaze found Freya's, and for just an instant the mask slipped entirely. What she saw beneath it made her blood run cold. I'm glad you found happiness, sister, he murmured. Truly. I hope you and your child have many years to enjoy it. Then he was gone, striding out the door with the easy confidence of a man who'd already won a game no one else knew they were playing. Freya stood frozen in his wake, trembling so violently she might have fallen if not for Kale's steady presence beside her. Her wolf was howling warnings, her daughter kicking frantically, and something cold had replaced the warmth she'd grown used to, a dread that settled into her bones like the frost she'd nearly died in. "He's going to kill us." The words emerged barely above a whisper. "Me and my daughter. That's why he came. To see if I survived. And when he found out I did, to figure out how to finish what he started." Kale's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her against his chest. She went willingly, too shaken to resist, and buried her face in the warmth of his throat. He smelled like pine and wood smoke, and something essentially him, and her wolf keened with relief at the comfort of her mate's embrace. "He won't touch you," Kale growled against her hair. "Either of you. I swear it on my life, Freya. I will tear this world apart before I let him hurt you." She wanted to believe him. Oh, how desperately she wanted to believe him. But Hadrian was clever, and cruel, and patient. He'd spent years building the trap that had destroyed her life. Whatever scheme he was weaving now, it would be thorough, careful, deadly. And Freya had no idea how to stop it. The next few days passed in a blur of tension and preparation. Kyle doubled the guards around the village, sent scouts to track Hadrian's party and ensure they actually left Ravencrest territory, and kept Freya close. Not smotheringly so, but near enough that she could feel his reassuring presence whenever her fear threatened to overwhelm her. They talked more openly now. Freya found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone, the small cruelties Hadrian had inflicted throughout her childhood, the way he'd isolated her from friends and allies, the gradual erosion of her confidence until she'd been unable to recognize the trap closing around her. Kale listened without judgment, his amber eyes dark with barely restrained fury, his hands gentle when they touched hers. "I should have seen it coming," she admitted one evening, curled in a chair by the healer's cottage fire while Kale sat across from her in his usual spot. "He was always jealous, always competing. But I thought family meant something. I thought blood bonds couldn't be broken. Family is more than blood." Kale's voice was rough. "It's choice. Loyalty. The people who stand beside you when everything falls apart. Not the ones who push you off the cliff and call it love. Is that what Ravencrest is? A family of choice? It's what I'm trying to build." He gestured toward the window, toward the village beyond. "Most of us lost everyone in the war. Parents, siblings, children. We're not bound by blood anymore. We're bound by survival, by the promise that we'll never let anyone be alone again." Freya felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back, but some must have shown, because Kale leaned forward with concern. "What is it?" "Nothing. Just..." She pressed a hand to her belly, where her daughter had gone still, apparently soothed by the fire's warmth and her mother's settling heartbeat. "I've never had that. A place where I belonged. Even before Hadrian's betrayal, I always felt like an outsider in my own pack. Like I was performing a role rather than living a life. And here?" She met his eyes, and the air between them went taut as a plucked string. "Here feels different. You feel different. I don't know if I can explain it." "You don't have to explain it." Kale's voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "I feel it too. The bond. The rightness of you being here. Like my whole life has been leading to this moment. To this cottage. To you." Freya's breath caught. They were still separated by several feet of space, still maintaining that careful distance he'd established from the beginning, but suddenly it felt like no distance at all. Like they were standing on opposite sides of a door that was slowly, inevitably, swinging open. "Kale." She didn't know what she intended to say. His name just slipped out, heavy with emotions she couldn't name. He was on his feet before she could blink, but he didn't close the distance. Just stood there, tension radiating from every line of his body, his hands clenched at his sides, as if he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. "You need to rest," he said hoarsely. "It's late. I should..." "Stay." The word hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Freya hadn't planned to say it, but now that it was out, she couldn't bring herself to take it back. She was so tired of being alone, so tired of walls and distance and fear. Kale's jaw tightened, his gaze burning in the firelight. Freya, if I stay... I know. She did know. Could feel the same need thrumming through the bond between them, could see it in the rigid set of his shoulders and the way his breathing had gone ragged. I'm not asking you to. I just don't want to be alone tonight. I keep seeing Hadrian's face. Keep remembering the way he looked at me before he left. And I think... She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. But Kale seemed to understand anyway. He crossed to her chair slowly, carefully, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, then sank to his knees beside her. I'll stay as long as you want me, he murmured, taking her hand in his. His touch sent sparks racing up her arm, but there was nothing demanding in it. Just comfort. Just connection. Just the simple, profound intimacy of being close to someone who saw you completely and wanted you anyway. I'll always stay, Freya. However you need me. She didn't cry. She was too exhausted for tears, too wrung out from the emotional upheaval of the past week. But she let herself lean into him, let herself breathe in his scent and feel his warmth and trust. For just this moment, just tonight, that she was safe. They stayed like that until the fire burned low, and when Freya finally drifted into sleep, her mate was still beside her. She woke to screaming. Freya jolted upright, disoriented, her heart slamming against her ribs. The fire had died to embers, casting the cottage in deep shadows, and for a terrible moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then Kale's scent hit her. Pine and wood smoke, comfort and mate, and reality crashed back. The screaming was coming from outside, high-pitched, terrified, accompanied by the clash of steel and the unmistakable snarls of wolves in combat. Stay here. Kyle was already on his feet, his body tense with battle readiness. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me or Elena. Kale, what? But he was gone, bursting through the door and shifting mid-stride, his body exploding into the massive black wolf Freya had glimpsed only once before. She scrambled after him, peering into the chaos that had consumed the village. Fire. There was fire everywhere. Cottages burning, flames licking at the patched roof of the pack hall, smoke billowing thick and choking through the night air. And among the flames, shapes moved. Wolves she didn't recognize, their markings unfamiliar, their eyes gleaming with malicious purpose. Blood moon colors, her wolf snarled. Our brother's wolves. He's attacking the pack. Horror flooded through her. Hadrian hadn't left. He'd been waiting, planning, and now he was burning Ravencrest to the ground to get to her. A massive gray wolf broke away from the fighting and charged toward the healer's cottage. Freya stumbled backward, a scream building in her throat, but before it could escape, a black blur intercepted the attacker. Kale hit the gray wolf with the force of an avalanche, and they went tumbling across the ground in a savage tangle of fangs and claws. Freya wanted to help, wanted to shift and fight and protect the mate she hadn't even fully claimed yet. But her wolf was still weak from months of suppression, and her pregnant body was in no condition for combat. All she could do was watch, helpless and terrified as the battle raged around her. More Ravencrest wolves were emerging now, half-shifted forms and fully transformed beasts throwing themselves at the invaders. But the Blood Moon attackers were fresh, well-fed, trained for exactly this kind of assault. And there were so many of them, far more than should have accompanied a simple diplomatic party. He planned this from the beginning, Freya realized sickly. The ambassador visit was just reconnaissance. The real attack force was waiting nearby. Kale's scouts had tracked Hadrian's party south toward the border, but the attack came from the east, from the network of abandoned mine tunnels that honeycombed the mountains beyond Ravencrest. Tunnels that a diplomatic visitor would have had plenty of time to map during his tour of the territory. A howl split the night, triumphant, vicious, achingly familiar. Freya's blood turned to ice as she recognized the voice. Hadrian. He emerged from the smoke like a nightmare-given form, flanked by two massive wolves who moved with the synchronized precision of trained killers. In his human form, dressed in black combat leathers, he looked nothing like the concerned brother who'd pleaded for her return. This was the predator beneath the mask, finally revealing its true face. "Little sister." His voice carried over the din of battle, smooth and almost playful. "I told you I hoped you'd have many years of happiness. I suppose I should have been more specific about how many?" Freya backed toward the cottage door, one hand pressed protectively over her belly. Her daughter had gone rigid and still inside her, the first time the pup had gone completely still since Hadrian's visit, as if even the child recognized the predator's scent and knew to hide. "Kale!" She screamed for her mate, but the black wolf was still locked in combat with the gray, their fight having carried them out of sight behind a burning building. She was alone, unprotected, and Hadrian was getting closer with every step. "The seer told me something interesting about your child, you know?" Hadrian's smile was a knife's edge in the firelight. "Golden eyes," she said, "like the old gods. Power that could shake the foundations of packs and kingdoms alike." He spread his hands, gesturing at the chaos around them. "You can see why I couldn't allow that. An heir with divine blood? It would have made you more important than me, more valuable, and we both know I can't have that." "You're insane." Freya's voice cracked. "You've destroyed our family, killed innocent people. For what? A prophecy that might not even be true?" "Oh, it's true." Hadrian's eyes gleamed with something that looked almost like religious fervor. "I've seen it in my dreams. Your daughter, grown and terrible, leading armies against everyone who ever wronged her. Against me. But if she never draws breath?" He shrugged elegantly. "No prophecy, no threat. Just my poor, confused sister, who tragically died in a rogue attack on the Ravencrest pack. Father will be so distraught." He was close enough now that Freya could see the individual flames reflected in his eyes, close enough that his wolves could reach her in a single leap, close enough that she knew, with terrible certainty, that no help would reach her in time. "I'm going to die here. My daughter is going to die before she even has a chance to live." The thought sent something cracking through her. Some wall she hadn't known she'd built. Some barrier holding back power she'd never understood. The golden warmth in her chest exploded outward like a star being born, and suddenly she wasn't seeing the world through human eyes anymore. She was seeing it through fire. The fire that poured through Freya's veins wasn't destruction, it was illumination. Every shadow in the burning village snapped into crystalline clarity. Every heartbeat of every wolf within 100 yards pulsed against her awareness like stars in a constellation she'd never known how to read. And Hadrian, standing before her with his mask of confident cruelty, suddenly looked very, very small. "What?" His voice cracked, the first genuine emotion she'd heard from him in years. Fear. Pure, primal fear. "Your eyes, they're gold," Freya finished for him. Her voice came out layered, resonant, as if someone else was speaking through her. Someone ancient and powerful, and absolutely done with being afraid. "Like the old gods," you said, "like my daughter. Like grandmother Alara, whose gift you dismissed as fairy tales because you were too busy scheming for power you didn't deserve." The two wolves flanking Hadrian whimpered and backed away, their ears flattening against their skulls. They could feel it too, the weight of something divine pressing down on them, demanding submission. Freya didn't know how she was doing it, didn't know where this power had been hiding all her life, but she knew, with bone-deep certainty, that it had been waiting for exactly this moment, waiting for her to stop running, to stop accepting the role of victim, to finally fight back. "You're bluffing." Hadrian's voice was steadier now, but his scent betrayed him. Sharp with terror, sour with desperation. "You can't control it. You've never even known it existed. One pregnant female against trained warriors? You'll exhaust yourself in seconds and then— Then what? Freya took a step toward him, and the golden light around her pulsed brighter. You'll kill me like you planned? Kill your own sister and her unborn child because a seer told you I might be more important than you someday? I'm the heir. The words exploded out of him, all pretense of smooth control shattered. I'm the one who trained for leadership, who studied pack politics, who sacrificed everything for the Blood Moon legacy. And you with your quiet ways and your pathetic need to please everyone, you were supposed to be nothing. A pawn to be married off for alliances, not some God's blessed vessel carrying the next divine bloodline. The truth of it hit Freya like a physical blow. All those years of his subtle cruelty, his careful manipulation, his slow campaign to isolate her from their parents. It hadn't been casual sibling rivalry. It had been calculated destruction. He'd been trying to break her spirit long before the seer's prophecy gave him an excuse to break her body. You're right about one thing, Freya said softly. I was nothing. I let myself be nothing because I thought that's what family meant. Sacrifice, submission, always putting everyone else first. She raised her chin, feeling her wolf surge up alongside the golden power, both of them finally aligned, finally free. But I'm not nothing anymore. I'm carrying a daughter who will change the world. I'm mated to an alpha who sees my worth. And I am done letting you make me small. Hadrian's composure cracked completely. He lunged for her, shifting mid-leap into a massive gray wolf with foam flecking his jaws, all rational strategy abandoned in favor of pure, murderous rage. Freya didn't flinch. The golden light exploded outward from her chest, catching Hadrian mid-transformation and freezing him in place. He hung suspended in the air, half human and half wolf, his features twisted in a grotesque rictus of fury and fear. His two guard wolves tried to run, but the power caught them too, pinning them to the scorched earth like insects in amber. I could kill you right now, Freya said, and the terrifying thing was how calm she felt, how certain. I could reach into your chest and stop your heart the way you plan to stop my daughter's. The power is there. I can feel it. Hadrian made a strangled sound, trying to speak through a throat that wouldn't obey him. But I won't. Freya's voice rang out across the battlefield, and she felt other eyes turning toward her. Ravencrest wolves pausing in their fights, Blood Moon attackers freezing with sudden uncertainty. Because I'm not you, Hadrian. I don't destroy family for power. I don't murder innocents because they threaten my ambition. She released her hold on him just enough that he could speak, watching him crumple to his knees in the ash-covered ground. Mercy, he gasped. Freya, please. I'm your brother. You stopped being my brother the moment you convinced our parents to throw me into the snow. Freya's voice was steady, but tears were streaming down her face now. Grief for the family she'd lost, for the brother she'd once loved, for the girl she'd been before all of this. You don't get to claim that bond when you've spent years poisoning it. A massive black wolf burst through the smoke, and Freya's heart clenched with relief so intense it nearly buckled her knees. Kyle was covered in blood. Some of it his, most of it not. But he was alive. He was here. And his storm-gray eyes, no amber in them now, just raw, desperate relief, locked onto her with an expression that made her breath catch. Wonder. Pride, fierce protective love. She could feel through their half-formed bond that his wolf had gone utterly silent, not with aggression or dominance, but with the stunned, trembling quiet of a creature that had almost lost everything and couldn't yet believe it hadn't. He shifted as he ran, returning to human form just in time to catch her as her legs finally gave out. The golden power was still flowing through her, but it was exhausting, like trying to hold back an ocean with her bare hands. I've got you, Kale murmured against her hair, his arms wrapping around her with desperate tenderness. I've got you, mate. You're safe. Hadrian, she managed. The confession. I heard. Kale's voice went flat and dangerous. The whole pack heard. You made sure of that, didn't you? Freya realized with a start that she had. The golden power had amplified her voice, carried her words to every wolf within earshot. Every accusation she'd made, every confession she'd drawn from her brother, they'd all been witnessed, documented, undeniable. Clever girl, Kale breathed, pressing a kiss to her temple. My brilliant, brave mate. He released her gently, making sure she could stand on her own, then turned to face Hadrian with the cold authority of a king about to pass judgment. Around them, the battle had stopped. Blood Moon wolves were surrendering or fleeing, and Ravencrest warriors were herding them into submission with brutal efficiency. Hadrian Blood Moon. Kale's voice carried the weight of pack law, ancient and absolute. You stand accused of conspiracy to murder my mate and my heir, of attacking sovereign Ravencrest territory, of violating the sacred laws of hospitality and pack truce. How do you answer? Hadrian laughed, a broken, bitter sound. Does it matter? You've already decided my fate, the great Alpha King, so noble and righteous. He spat blood onto the ground. You think you've won something here? Her power will destroy you eventually. It destroys everything it touches. You would know about destruction, Kale said quietly. You've built your whole life around it. He glanced back at Freya, a question in his eyes. This is your choice, your justice. What do you want? For a long moment, Freya stared at the creature her brother had become, the boy who'd taught her to ride, the young man who'd helped her practice shifting for the first time, the monster who'd orchestrated her exile, tried to murder her child, and burned an innocent village to fuel his ambition. The old laws demand blood, she said finally. He violated pack law, guest right, and family bond. He intended to kill an heir of divine blood. She met Hadrian's eyes one last time. I won't ask for mercy. I won't grant it either. Hadrian sneered, even now trying to salvage some shred of superiority. She's a whore carrying a bastard. Freya interrupted him, her voice ringing clear across the silent battlefield. I carry the child of no man, brother. The golden eyes are mine to pass down, the blessing our grandmother carried. You destroyed our family for power you never understood. Kale's claws extended, gleaming in the firelight. Any last words? Hadrian opened his mouth, probably for another insult, another attempt to wound even in death. But Kale didn't give him the chance. His claws tore through Hadrian's throat in a single, precise strike, and Freya watched without flinching as her betrayer died choking on his own ambitions. The body crumpled to the ground, and something in Freya's chest finally released. The golden power receded like a tide going out, leaving her hollow and exhausted but strangely at peace. It was over. Hadrian was dead. Her daughter was safe. She swayed on her feet, and Kyle was there instantly, gathering her into his arms with infinite gentleness. Let's get you inside, he murmured. Elena needs to check on you and the pup. Freya wanted to argue. There was cleanup to do, prisoners to process, a village to rebuild, but her body had reached its limit. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Kale's face above hers, his eyes soft with love and bright with unshed tears. She slept for 2 days. When she finally woke, it was to warmth and safety and the familiar scent of pine and wood smoke. Kale was there, of course, had apparently refused to leave her side for more than a few minutes at a time, according to Elena's fond exasperation. The healer reported that both Freya and the baby were fine, just exhausted from channeling power that hadn't been used in generations. The old texts call it the divine flame, Elena explained, pressing a cup of herbal tea into Freya's hands. Your grandmother Ilara carried it too. The old records are quite clear on that. It's why the seers always paid attention to your bloodline. She shook her head in wonder. I've never seen anything like what you did out there. Holding an alpha frozen in mid-shift? Amplifying your voice across an entire battlefield? Your daughter is going to be something extraordinary. Freya's hand drifted to her belly, where her little one was kicking contentedly. She already is, she murmured. Elena, she said after a long pause. The night I conceived. I have no memory of it. Nothing. I woke with the warmth already there, and I've never been able to explain it. The healer was quiet for a moment. The old texts describe it as a kindling. She said carefully. When the divine flame passes to a new generation, it doesn't require the usual means. Ilara's journals say she experienced the same thing, a night of dreamless sleep, then waking with the knowledge that something had changed. The flame chooses its own vessel, Freya. Your daughter wasn't conceived by any man. She was kindled by the bloodline itself, answering a need it recognized in you. Freya let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for 7 months. Not a violation. Not a mystery she'd spend the rest of her life afraid to solve. A gift, passed down through blood and fire, the same way it had come to her grandmother decades before. The days that followed were a blur of recovery and reconstruction. The Blood Moon attackers who'd surrendered were given a choice: swear loyalty to Ravencrest or return to their pack in disgrace. Many chose to stay, having witnessed Hadrian's true nature and wanting no part of the corruption he'd represented. Word spread quickly through the packs about what had happened: the exile who'd turned out to carry divine blood, the alpha who'd protected her, the dramatic confrontation that had ended with justice served. Within days, messengers from 3 neighboring territories arrived bearing the same word: King. The northern packs had been without a sovereign since the Blood War, and an alpha who could defeat a full Blood Moon assault with a decimated pack had earned the title by the oldest law there was: survival. Messengers arrived from the Blood Moon pack within a week. Freya's parents, it seemed, had finally learned the truth about their son's manipulations. They wanted to formally apologize, to restore her status, to welcome her home. Freya declined. "This is my home now," she told Chaol, watching the village slowly come back to life around them. New cottages were rising from the ashes, their frames strong and their foundations deep. Refugees were arriving daily, drawn by rumors of a pack that sheltered the outcast and welcomed the broken. "Ravencrest is where I belong, where my daughter will be born." Kyle pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Does that mean you're ready?" She knew what he was asking. They'd danced around it for days. The bond that hummed between them, incomplete and yearning. The marking that would seal them together forever. She'd been hesitant before, still learning to trust, still healing from betrayal. But now, "Yes," she breathed. "I'm ready." That night, Chaol led her to his chambers. Their chambers now, she supposed. The room was simple but warm, lit by candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. A fire crackled in the hearth, and fresh furs covered the bed. He'd clearly prepared for this moment, and the thought made her heart flutter with nervous anticipation. "We don't have to do this tonight," he said, even as his eyes blazed with barely contained desire. "If you need more time..." "I've spent my whole life waiting for permission to want things," Freya interrupted, stepping closer to him. "Waiting to be told I was good enough, worthy enough, important enough. And then I met you. And you looked at me like I already was all of those things, like I'd been them all along." She reached up to cup his scarred face in her hands, marveling at how something so fierce could be so gentle with her. "I don't want to wait anymore, Kyle. I want to be yours, completely, permanently. I want the whole pack to know that I chose you, and you chose me, and nothing will ever change that." His breath caught. His hands came up to cover hers, trembling slightly against her skin. "The marking is permanent," he said hoarsely. "Once it's done, we'll be bound forever. You'll feel what I feel, know what I know. There's no going back." "I know." She stretched up on her toes to press her lips to his, soft and sweet and full of promise. "That's what I want. That's what I choose." A growl rumbled through his chest. Not threatening, but hungry. Desperate. He'd been holding himself back for weeks, she realized. Giving her space, letting her heal, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. And now that she was finally offering everything, he was barely containing the need to claim her. Freya. Her name was a prayer on his lips. My mate. My Luna. My heart. He kissed her then, deep and thorough and overwhelming. His hand slid into her hair, tilting her head back to give him better access. She melted into him, her wolf singing with joy, the divine flame settling low and steady beneath her ribs like a banked hearth. They made their way to the bed without breaking the kiss, tumbling onto the soft furs in a tangle of limbs and whispered endearments. Kale worshipped every inch of her, kissing her eyelids, her cheeks, the curve of her neck where the mark would go. He traced the swell of her belly with reverent hands, murmuring to the daughter who kicked beneath his palm. I'll protect you both until my last breath, he vowed. I'll love you until the stars burn out. Freya pulled him up for another kiss. Show me, she demanded. Make me yours. His pupils dilated until the gray of his irises was nearly gone, his wolf surging to the surface. He positioned himself at the junction of her neck and shoulder, his breath hot against her skin. This will hurt at first, he warned. But then, I trust you. His fangs sank into her flesh. Pain exploded through her, sharp and bright and absolutely overwhelming. She cried out, her body arching beneath him, her hands fisting in his hair. But even as the pain crested, something else was building beneath it. Warmth, connection. The sense of another soul pressing against hers, seeking entrance. She opened herself to it, and Kale poured into her like sunlight flooding a dark room. She felt his loneliness, years of isolation after his pack was decimated, building walls around his heart to survive. She felt his hope when he first caught her scent, followed by terror that she would reject him. She felt his fierce devotion, his desperate need to be worthy of her, his overwhelming relief when she chose him over her family's lies. She felt how much he loved her, how completely, how eternally. The pain transformed into pleasure so intense it stole her breath. She was gasping, keening, pulling him closer even as his fangs stayed locked in her flesh. The bond was forming, golden threads weaving between their souls, binding them together in ways that went deeper than blood or law or pack custom. When he finally released her, licking the wound to seal it, she was crying. Not from pain, but from the sheer overwhelming rightness of belonging to someone who belonged to her in return. Your turn, she managed, her voice rough. I need to mark you too. Yes. He bared his throat to her without hesitation, the most vulnerable thing a wolf could do, offering his life to her fangs. Mark me. Make me yours. Freya's wolf surged forward eagerly, her human teeth ached, lengthening into something sharper, more primal. She found the junction of his neck and shoulder, feeling his pulse race beneath her lips. Then she bit down. Kale groaned, a sound of pleasure, not pain, and pulled her even closer. Through their forming bond, she felt his ecstasy, his relief, his absolute surrender to her claim. She tasted his blood on her tongue, hot and rich, and somehow exactly right. And she drank deeply of the connection flowing between them. His memories washed through her. His parents, killed in the war that decimated Ravencrest. His desperate struggle to hold what remained of his pack together. The moment he saw her lying in the snow and knew, with terrifying certainty, that his whole world had just changed. She felt how much she meant to him, not as a possession or a prize, but as a partner, an equal. The other half of his soul that he'd been missing without even knowing it. When she released him, both of them were trembling. The bond settled into place between them like a lock clicking home, permanent, unbreakable, absolutely complete. Mine. Kale breathed against her marked skin. Yours, she whispered back, pressing her lips to the wound she'd left on his shoulder. Mate, they said together, and the word had never felt more sacred. They held each other for a long time after that, wrapped in furs and firelight, feeling the bond hum contentedly between them. Freya's hand rested on her belly, and Kyle's covered it, both of them marveling at the little life that had brought them together. "She's going to have the best of both of us," Kyle murmured. "Your strength and wisdom, my stubbornness and protective instincts." Freya laughed softly. "I thought I was the stubborn one." "You definitely are. I'm just saying she's doomed either way." The teasing felt natural now, easy, like they'd been doing it for years instead of weeks. The bond let her feel his happiness. Uncomplicated joy, something he hadn't experienced since childhood, and she sent her own contentment flowing back to him. "What happens now?" she asked eventually. "With the pack, I mean. With everything." "Now we rebuild." Kale pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Together." "The Blood Moon Elders have already sent word that they're dissolving Hadrian's false charges against you. Several of their pack members want to defect to Ravencrest. They saw what you did, what he tried to do, and they want no part of that corruption. And my parents? They've requested an audience, to apologize, to try to make amends." He paused, reading her emotions through the bond. "You don't have to see them if you're not ready." Freya considered it. The complicated tangle of grief and anger and lost love that still surrounded her memories of her mother and father. They'd believed Hadrian's lies. They'd turned their backs when she needed them most. But they were also the people who'd raised her, loved her, taught her everything she knew. "Maybe someday," she said finally. "Not yet. I'm not ready to forgive. But maybe someday I will be." "That's more than they deserve." Kyle's arms tightened around her. "You're more than they deserve. More than any of us deserve." "Stop that." She poked him in the ribs. "I can feel you getting all self-deprecating through the bond. It's very annoying." His surprised laugh warmed her from the inside out. "I'm going to have to learn to hide my thoughts better." "Don't you dare. I like knowing what you're feeling." She snuggled closer, yawning, even when it's annoyingly humble. They slept tangled together that night, and Freya's dreams were full of golden light and possibilities. Spring came early to Ravencrest. Freya stood on the steps of the pack hall, newly rebuilt, stronger than before, and watched her people go about their daily lives, wolves training in the practice yard, children chasing each other between cottages, elders sharing stories around a communal fire. Her people, her pack, her home. A month had passed since the attack, and the transformation was remarkable. New families had arrived weekly, drawn by rumors of a pack that welcomed the broken and celebrated the different. The Divine Flame refugees from distant packs, seeking the protection of the Luna who carried the old god's blessing. Warriors who'd grown disillusioned with corrupt alphas, looking for a leader worth following. Ravencrest was no longer the decimated remnant it had been. It was growing into something new, something stronger. "You're doing that thing again," Kyle murmured, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her expanded belly. She was massive now, days away from delivery, and he'd become increasingly protective as her due date approached. "What thing?" "That thing where you look at everyone like you can't believe they're real?" He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You've been doing it every day for weeks. It's very endearing." Freya leaned back into his warmth, feeling their bond pulse with quiet contentment. "I spent 7 months believing no one would ever want me again. Believing my daughter and I would die alone in the wilderness because my own family threw us away. And now," she gestured at the thriving village before them. "Now I have all of this. It's a lot to process." "You have all of this because you fought for it." Kyle turned her gently to face him, tilting her chin up with one finger. "You stood up to your brother. You unlocked power that's been dormant for generations. You showed everyone, including yourself, that you're exactly the Luna this pack needed." "I had help." She stretched up to kiss him, soft and sweet. A certain stubborn alpha who refused to let me push him away. He sounds handsome and devastatingly charming. Moderately attractive at best. Terrible sense of humor. His outraged laugh echoed across the village, drawing indulgent smiles from nearby pack members. Everyone had grown accustomed to their Alpha and Luna's playful bickering, a sign of the deep love and easy partnership that had transformed Ravencrest from a place of grief into a place of hope. They stood together on the steps for a long time, watching the village move through its evening rhythms. A woman Freya recognized, one of the Blood Moon defectors, was teaching a group of pups to weave baskets in the shade of the new storehouse. Garrett, who'd once demanded Freya be driven out, was hauling timber for a cottage that would house a family of refugees arriving from the east. He caught Freya's eye as he passed and dipped his head. Not the performative deference of a wolf who feared his alpha, but the genuine respect of a man who'd been wrong and knew it. "He apologized to me yesterday," Freya said quietly. Garrett, properly, said he'd been scared and small and that I deserved better. Cale's arms tightened around her. "What did you say?" "That I understood fear. That it makes people cruel in ways they don't always mean." She paused. "And that if he ever called my daughter a bastard again, I'd freeze him in place and let the pups use him as a climbing post." Cale's laugh was warm against her hair. "That's my Luna." The divine flame had become familiar over the past weeks, less a foreign presence and more a second heartbeat, steady and sure. Elena theorized that the baby was helping her regulate it somehow, their shared blood working in harmony. Some mornings, Freya practiced with it. Small things, warming a cup of tea between her palms, sensing the heartbeats of wolves across the village, learning the boundaries of a gift she was only beginning to understand. "I've been thinking about my parents," she said, the words coming slowly, tested and measured. "Not about forgiving them, not yet, but about writing to my mother. Just letting her know the baby is healthy, that I'm alive and not alone." Cale was quiet for a moment, and through the bond she felt him weighing his words carefully, the lesson from that evening in the cottage still alive in him. "Is that what you want? Not what you think you should do. What you actually want." She considered it. "I want her to know I survived without her. I want her to sit with that. And then, maybe, if she can carry the weight of what she let happen, maybe she can earn the right to meet her granddaughter. Then write the letter. I'll have a writer take it when you're ready." The sun was sinking below the tree line, painting the rebuilt rooftops in shades of copper and rose. Freya settled deeper into Cale's arms, feeling their daughter shift and stretch inside her. Not kicking now, just moving, settling, getting ready. "Your father's going to spoil you rotten," Freya murmured to her belly. "And so will every single wolf in this pack. You're going to be absolutely insufferable by the time you're 3. A flutter beneath her ribs was the only response. She smiled, watching the last light fade over her new home. The village she'd helped rebuild. The pack that had chosen her. The future she'd never dared to dream of. There would be challenges ahead. Other packs would test their strength. The divine power she carried would need to be understood and controlled. And somewhere out there, her parents would have to reckon with the daughter they'd failed to protect. But she wasn't facing any of it alone. Not anymore. Through the bond, she felt Cale's contentment. Deep and unhurried. The settled warmth of a man who'd stopped building walls around his heart. His determination to make something lasting of these ruins. His absolute certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. She closed her eyes and let herself believe, finally, that she deserved this happiness. That she was worthy of love. That she was home. 2 days later, their daughter was born with golden eyes that blazed like twin suns, and Freya knew with every fiber of her being that the future was going to be extraordinary.